This episode of Let's Argue About Plants is brought to you by Bluestone Perennials, a second-generation, nationally renowned mail-order nursery. Bluestone offers over 1,000 varieties of perennials, grasses, ground covers and shrubs for shipment throughout the US. All plants are grown in natural fiber, biodegradable pots that plant directly into the soil, and all plants are 100% guaranteed to grow. Visit bluestoneperennials.com today.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Let's Argue About Plants, the podcast for people who love plants.
But not always the same ones. I'm Carol Collins. I'm Associate Editor at Fine Gardening Magazine.
Hey everybody, it's Danielle from Fine Gardening Magazine. And Carol, spring has sprung. I am saying now. Well, actually, as we record this, I was just complaining that I got a dusting of snow last night, but I feel like that's a freakish thing. Spring is here in earnest, correct?
Correct. And I would say snow is spring weather sometimes.
This is true. This is true here in New England. An occasional snow shower every so often is, just what we learn to expect in April and sometimes into May. But today we're going to talk about, we've been asked several times, Carol, of like, hey, every so often, can you do a planting design episode? We love hearing about the plants that you guys recommend, but what about designing with the plants? Now, we're not landscape designers, but we know what works and what we've seen in our own gardens and what we've seen when we visited gardens. So we're going to talk about spring combinations that work quite well, correct?
Absolutely. And I have one from my garden and one from an author garden. So I don't know if that's cheating, but
No, ditto. I have one combo that I've done myself, actually in a container, but would look well in the garden as well. And then one from an author garden that I'm going to try to copy, or copy is a bad word, right? Emulate. I'm going to try and emulate that in my garden coming up. But listen, before we get into it, we were chatting right before this started about the webinar that we saw, or that we were witnessing and took part in last night with Annie Guilfoyle, and we wanted to let you all know, thank you so much for showing up for that. It was very soothing. It was so incredibly inspiring. I took so many notes last night. What about you, Carol?
Absolutely, yes. And we're recording right after that ran, but this is going to be airing a few weeks later. And if you all missed that webinar, we have it at our website, finegardening.com. Is it under the webinars tab, Danielle?
It is right at the top of the website. You've got your navigation bars up there, and we've got a webinar tab. So click on that and you will be able to, if you missed the free webinar last night, there's a recording of it. And, that brings us to what we're working very diligently on right now, Carol, which is our final, e-learning course of the 2023 season, and that is Garden Ideas That Work. I feel like we saved the best for last. I really do. And this 3-part course is going to start in May, everyone. So when we get, revved up, May 5th is the first class. There's 3 total classes, one with Noel Kingsbury, who is basically, Pete Udoff's second in command. He's an incredible designer who's won multiple awards, written a ton of books. He's going to talk about doing mixed border plantings, so mixed plantings that use woody plants and perennials and annuals and tropicals and the whole 9, but how do you make that composition look really well? And Annie's doing another class, right, Carol?
That's right. And she's amazing. I loved how many visuals she presents, and I found myself, sketching and making notes while I listened, and I imagine that the full course will be even more and better of that.
She is, and she's really focusing in on her full course, which is part of this, is all on small spaces or tight spaces or nooks or, urban areas, the tiny postage stamp yard. She's really delves into that in her long course. And yes, the visuals, I will say, nobody's going to be disappointed because it was so inspiring. And our final presenter as part of that course is Elliot Forsyth. He's from Scotland. He is specializes in perennial plant design. And how do you mix perennials together and make them look good all season long? And, people have written into us and they're like, yeah, but these guys are all from the UK. Guess what? Their principles are applicable to all of us here in North America. They give us a wide range of plant options for different zones. And these design principles are just so invaluable. It's like taking an APLD course, American Landscape Design course. So go to our website, finegardening.com. You can click under that webinar tab. You'll see this full course. You'll learn more about it, read more about the classes, and you can register to take the course if you're interested. I know Carol and I will be taking the course actually as students. Both of us were just talking about that. All right.
It's fun to be a student again, and it's easy. It's easy. Just go to finegardening.com.
That's very true. That's very true. All right. Well, so we got that business out of control. Thank you so much for listening to our spiel. But, when you work so hard on something for over a year, like Carol and I have on these courses, it's really, we want to tell you guys about it so you can go and learn what we've learned. So speaking of Elliot, in his talk, talking about combinations of perennials, what did you choose for combinations for spring, Carol? I'm very interested, since we had talked about tulips last episode. Do bulbs make an appearance in your captivating combinations for spring that you're going to talk about?
Actually, they did not. My combinations are both sort of mid-spring, and so at this point, the main bulb show is over.
Okay.
And for me, my bulbs are mixed into perennials that come much later in the season. And I realized I don't have any combinations with bulbs. So maybe that's something I can work on. I do, but I've talked about it before. The reticulated iris thing. Yeah, you guys are way too much about that. But yeah, other than that, really no. How about you? Do you have a bulb combo?
I do. It's a later bulb. It's a bulb that comes up a little bit later. And it's also the spring combo that I was going to talk about that I've done in containers before. So I think that makes it a little bit easier to, get that combination, really on point. But I'm curious then. So tell me what your first, and you said mid-spring, right? You're focusing on mid-spring for a combination.
This for us here in Connecticut, this would be happening in early May. And my first one, I looked, and my photo was taken May 12th. And so this is my rain garden. It's on the southeast corner of my house. So it gets a little bit of morning sun, and then it's got filtered shade the rest of the day. And it's got moist, well-drained soil, about as moist as it gets on my property because it's the rain garden. So it's under a gutter. The water goes from the roof to the rain garden, then soaks into the ground very quickly because I have sandy soil. But that extra moisture is great for things like the plants that I'll be talking about. And the star of the show in May is foam flower. That is Tiarella cordifolia. It is hardy from zones 3 to 8. And it is the straight species, I think, that I have. I bought it off the bargain table at a nursery, and it just said Tiarella on it. I'm assuming it is not a named cultivar. And when I look at pictures of the straight species and I look at this plant, I think it's pretty much that's it. Super, super durable little plant. It gets only about 12 inches tall and wide, and it's like a clump forming perennial. So it spreads pretty slowly, but then it'll send out these stolons, runners, and over time, you can kind of get a ground cover going with it if you start with enough of it. But for me, I've mixed it with some other things that I think look pretty good and over a long season. So early in the spring, you get this wonderful foliage with Tiarella. You get the foamy white flowers. And then I have coming in nearby, I have some heucheras. I have Toffee Tart Heuchera, which is one of the newer ones. It's got sort of an amber color. And then I have Palace Purple, which is one of the oldest hybrid heucheras. And that's Palace Purple Heuchera. And it has more of like, purple, reddish purple, I guess.
Okay.
A dark leaf. But I've had a lot of those dark leaf heucheras that just didn't make it for very many years. And I don't know what's taking it out. Either it's the winter weather or the voles, or I don't know what. Deer will eat them sometimes, but I don't think it's that. Anyway, but I sort of collect heucheras. I love the Palace Purple because it's just like bulletproof, and I've had it for years. And
it's a classic for a reason, right?
Yeah. And then I have some ferns. The main one that you can see in the photo is interrupted fern. That's Osmunda claytonia. And that's another super hardy one. It's zones 3 to 8. And before you get the fern, you get the awesome little fiddleheads coming up, and that's always fun in spring, right? So that's what I have going on in my rain garden, and there are more plants than just that, but that's what you'd be noticing if you came and looked at it in May.
Oh my God. So the Tiarella is kind of blooming. That leaf has, a little bit of like reddish on it, like a little bit. So it sounds like it kind of creates like a color echo with the reddish of the heuchera. And then you've got, the fern in the background, which is kind of the foil to all of that. I bet you that texture too, because, those are two boulder leaf perennials, but then you get this like kind of feathery texture that's just, popping up against that boulder backdrop.
Exactly. And if someone is looking at the photo that's in the show notes, or if it's in the video version of this podcast, up in the right-hand corner, you'll see October Moon, Leucoceptrum October Moon, which is a perennial, but it looks like a shrub. And you see it just starting to come up with that it's got texture. It's got the beautiful green leaves that have a little variegation in them. So yeah, it's you're right. It's like a textural study with some color echoes.
I love that. And now you've painted the whole masterpiece for me, because having that Leucoceptrum in the background, which is kind of, that gives it that solid wall of all those, other players in the front to really pop out at you. Gosh, I love a fern in spring. I mean, I think that they kind of get underrated as like spring stars, because you're right. You get that fiddlehead, that newly emerging foliage is sometimes, a little bit red or bronzy on certain varieties. And then, yeah, it just unfurls to like this verdant green color that's just, makes you so excited.
Yeah. What do you have? What would you have, a bulb combo?
I do. So, I don't like pastels, and I think we talked about this, maybe touched on it briefly in our tulip our tulip episode that was last time. But it's really hard to get away from pastels in spring. So many of even the spring, perennials come in pastel colors. And this was a combination that I saw at New York Botanic Garden, NYBG, many, many years ago. And for some reason, it is all pastels, but it was so captivating to me that I had to try and duplicate it when I got home. So in a container, or I would say that this would be a nice little combination to put like up towards a pathway or your front entry stoop or something along those lines where it's very visual in the spring. I started with Mango Charm Tulip, which is a later blooming tulip, and it's not huge. It's 12 to 18 inches tall. It's a typical European tulip, so zones 3 to 7, and it's a standard egg-shaped bloom that's kind of in this fruity mango peach pink kind of shade with a really, really soft glow. The tips are also a little bit white, so, you know, it kind of tones it down a little bit so it doesn't look, you know, like tutti frutti gum or anything like that. But it's quite glowy. You know, that's how I would describe it. It's quite glowy. And this is a great combo, I should have said, for moist, well-drained soil, partial shade. I would say that that's the perfect combination for this. So for me, I have a covered porch, and in a container on my covered porch, this really lights up for those spring months. And then I paired that with peach flambe heuchera. So heuchera is making, you know, some waves on this episode so far, and it's zones 4 to 9. This is a bright pinky orange ruffled rosette of foliage. It forms kind of a tight clump. It's not a huge heuchera. It's one of the more undersized ones. It does have the species villosa in it though, and those tend to be a bit hardier. So after this combination in a pot was all done for me, I did chuck that puppy into the garden, and this peach flambe heuchera has come back for me for a few years now. So, and like you had said, that's pretty good for a heuchera. So there's a peachy orange rosette, kind of coppery foliage. Not only gets to be about 7 inches tall and about 14 inches wide. So really in a pot or in a combination planted close to each other, that heuchera is covering up the bare legs of the tulip, you know, so you got the tulip coming up with its foliage and then its blooms kind of hovering over the heuchera. And then throw in there a peach melba horned violet, which is Viola cornuta peach melba. Now, here's the things with violas or pansies or violets, you know, that whole family. Are they truly perennial? In some spots. So zone 6 to 9. However, I think a lot of times, you know, the chances for those of us in cooler zones for this to come back as a true perennial are probably not great, but they do tend to self-seed. So you will get babies the next year. So this peach melba is part of this sorbet series. So again, we're in that kind of pastel-y peach realm. You know, I think of just, you know, I don't know, for some reason now that we've said sorbet, I have ice cream in my head, but these ice cream tones, and it's got a light peach outer petal and then kind of a softish yellow glow of that center of that violet flower. This is a small-headed pansy viola. And then these copper reddish whiskers towards the middle. So, you know, it's kind of picking up on both the tones of the tulip and of that heuchera. And it's just this kind of coppery, peachy, pastel-y, just loveliness. And that viola really bridges the gap between the tulip and the heuchera. It blooms until it gets super hot. You know, so for tulips, you know, you get a couple of weeks of interest, but even when that tulip goes out of bloom, that foliage still stands tall and really still looks nice in this combination. The heuchera just continues to do its thing all throughout the entire season, partially in semi-evergreen for a lot of us who are zone 6 and warmer. And then the viola, it usually goes into May, into June, and then it just starts to get too darn hot. So at that point, usually what I do is I whack it back, I pull it out of the container, and I throw it in a partial shade area in the garden. And then in fall, when it's happy again, it basically has come back and it puts on a second set of bloom for me. And if I'm lucky, it self-sows as well. But that viola is only 6 to 8 inches tall. So that's kind of, you know, it's doing its thing and filling in all the gaps in between the heuchera and the tulip. And just together, it really makes me happy, which is really weird because it's all colors that I really, under normal circumstances, can't stand. But in spring, it makes me happy. Copper peach pastel. Who knew, right? Right. So we had a mid-spring. Mine was also a mid-spring combo. And what do we have coming up next from Carol Collins?
Okay, so this is the one from an author garden. This was designed by Jerry Fritz for Linden Hill Gardens, which is in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, in a town called Ottsville. And this garden was featured in our June 2020 issue. That's issue 193. And I love the title of this one. We called it Spring into Summer. So this was an article about plant combinations that sort of carry you from after your bulbs are done blooming into the very earliest days of summer. So I went there twice. I went in early May, and then I went at the end of May. And, you know, I think Jerry Fritz's secret is he puts a lot of plants in his beds, and he's really good at sequencing. So it was different things were happening between the beginning of May and the end of May. So the combo that if you're looking at the show notes, the combo that I had was a cover shot of that issue. And so, yeah, you're nodding your head. There's
a phlox in there. I remember that
phlox. That phlox is the star, right? That is the plant that got that shot on the cover. So he has this little pathway leading up to an office building. He uses this, so it's sort of like a campus with a bunch of different buildings. So he uses it as office space. There's a nursery there. So there's this little pathway leading up to the door of one of the buildings. And on either side, he has it planted with a beautiful mix of, you know, there are bulbs in there, but a lot of perennials, and it's sort of an underlayer under shrubs. And May Breeze woodland phlox is, you know, in full bloom, early May, gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. This is Phlox divaricata, and that is the native species that it has this huge native range. It goes as far north as Quebec and Ontario, and then south to Florida, and then as far west as South Dakota and New Mexico. So
wow,
yeah, pretty much all of Eastern North America. And
that is crazy.
So, you know, and that makes me think almost anybody could grow this if you have the right conditions. Now, one thing I noticed at Linden Hill is they've got it looks like high ground water table. Like in spring, the water was at the surface, and so it does love moist soil, and it is native where you find it in the wild. It's going to be in rich deciduous woodland. So you really want rich soil for it, and moist to slightly dry woods, but we're not talking about dry shade here. In like stream banks, you often find it near like a woodland path because it's very low growing. It only gets 12 to 15 inches tall and wide. But so with this beautiful, you know, white flowered phlox, he has Wanda primrose, which is Primula wanda, zones 3 to 9, and that has got that's an heirloom variety from England, super old variety, and it has deep red to purple flowers and yellow throats starting in April. And then he has this ground cover called Creeping Mazis, and that has small, people describe them as orchid-like purple flowers with little lobed petals on them. Super charming, mixed right in with the red, and it looks great. And the other plant that I think really makes this combination special is Ogon grassy-leafed sweet flag, which is Acorus gramineus Ogon, and that's a little less hardy, zones 5 to 9. But it's just this adorable grassy little thing that it's got golden leaves, and if you look at the photo, you can see it repeating, and that's, I think, part of the charm of this combo is that it isn't just one little blip in the landscape. He threads these elements through over a long, you know, walk up to this door, and it's kind of a journey. So I put a few more plant names into the show notes, and so that people can sort of figure out. There's a geranium in there, which is mostly texture at this time of year, but it will put out some flowers once the phlox stops blooming. This, I'll say the name. It's Siberian cranesbill geranium, Lawsovianum. And
okay,
yeah, so it's a species geranium, and it's got some single violet flowers with cute little purple whiskers. And so once May breeze stops blooming, this should
You're gonna
start kicking
get
in.
that hit purple again.
Exactly, the hit of purple, color, and it will continue. That one will continue to bloom from sort of early summer through fall. So it's the sequencing that I just think is so genius in this.
I'm going to put you on the spot, Carol, because I seem to remember that there was some sort of specimen small tree too that was in the back of that border, and in my head it kind of had like golden leaves. Am I off base here? You're looking at me like I am. I seem to
remembering
remember
the gold. I mean, I do. He has a lot of golden leaf plants
okay,
that
all
were
right.
in that article. But
I'm
I'm
trying
not
to
sure.
remember.
I
I thought
think
it was like maybe like gold bullion dogwood or something like that. Like for some reason, I seem to remember that, but I'll go back and look. That could be just me in my head designing Jerry Fritz's garden for him. So pay no attention, listeners. Pay no attention. I have no idea what I'm talking about. It was a stunning cover. It was a stunning combination. And yeah, especially also the location, that sense of repetition that really you could see pulls people down that pathway, whether you know it or not, you're just like looking from the next to the next to the next, and it's really pulling your eye because of the repetition of that gold and that purple. It's just one after the other. But yeah, gosh, that was a stunning article. Carol, will you drop the link into the show notes to that article too?
I absolutely will. I'll put that right with the photo.
Perfect. And everybody knows by now what we're talking about. If you're watching this on YouTube, or if you're listening to this in your car or while you're out in the garden, go to finegardening.com, click on that podcast tab up at the top, and we make sure that we photograph all of the plants that we talk about, and we list all the plant names. So you don't have to stop your weeding in order to write down these plant names. All right, well, so my final combination is a late spring, and it is a partial to full shade combination, and it is a dry shade combination once it's established. And I feel like we get so many letters of what can I plant underneath a tree? A mature tree, maybe not necessarily, 100-year-old oak tree, but a tree that's got some size and some canopy and some feeder roots going on. And this was a combination that I stumbled upon, admittedly, on a garden tour. So I'm not entirely sure who the owner and designer was because it was so long ago, but it was in Stonington, Connecticut. If you happen to be from Stonington and see it there, get in touch and I will gladly give you credit for this. I actually snapped the photo on my cell phone. I was, in my private time was doing this garden tour and just was captivated by it. And it starts out, it was at the base of a quite large, I believe it was a ornamental cherry tree. And it started out towards the front of the combination with lady's mantle. And Carol talked about this plant not too long ago, a couple episodes ago, and it's Alchemilla mollis. It's zones 3 to 8. This is a 1 to 2 foot tall and wide perennial with large scalloped, kind of a glaucous blue leaf with a little toothed edge to it. It's very soft gray green, slightly fuzzy. The leaves are quite large. They can be up to 6 inches across. So that's a very beefy, bold, textured plant. Carol talked about brilliantly. She did a much better description of the fact that it's got that little fuzz on it. It actually, when we get rain or any sort of dew, droplets actually collect in the leaves of this, almost lily pad like. And then, since we're talking about late spring, what happens in late spring to lady's mantle is it gets these large racemes of tiny chartreuse flowers. And it appears like this, kind of yellow haze above the mass of foliage. So the combo kind of starts with that around the outer edge. And then you move one step back towards the stump of the tree. And there's 5-finger Regerzia, which is Regerzia aesculifolia, and that's zones 5 to 7. Now, if you thought lady's mantle was bold, This is a bold shade plant. It is a 3 foot tall and wide, sometimes more. It says up to 5. I have never seen a regerzia that's 5 feet tall and wide. So I'm sticking with 3 to 4 on this one, but it's got these big, bold, palmy leaves that, almost look like rhubarb-esque. They're so big and wrinkly and eye-catching. It's really a bold focal point plant. So that guy's kind of hanging out in the back and is really starting to take down the scale of that tree. So, you don't see just this massive trunk and all these teeny tiny low growing perennials around it. And then in late spring, regerzia does bloom, and it gets a very similar flower to what that lady's mantle does. It's kind of a feathery plume of white flowers, very cotton candy-like. But I'll be honest, you don't grow regerzia for the flowers. You grow it for that bold foliage. Then hanging out next to it, this is a study in textures, is Halcyon hosta, which is a pretty classic hosta. It is a mid-size hosta that gets about 18 inches tall and wide. So it's bridging the gap between, again, that lady's mantle, which is low, and the regerzia that's really high. This is the hosta that's hanging out in the middle. And Halcyon just has this beautiful blue leaf to it, and if you keep it in partial shade to full shade, it maintains that blue. If you put a blue hosta into too much sun, it eventually just turns green. But this particular variety also has this wax over the leaf that just gives it this like frosted look to it, and it's really beautiful. It masses out quickly. Hostas are invaluable for planting under trees because they thrive. It's not just they survive, they thrive in that location. And that size gap, again, is bridged by the Halcyon hosta. And then finally, which I think was just sheer brilliance on the part of this gardener, they planted a Nellie Moser clematis at the base of the tree. So that's zones 4 to 9. This is a polite clematis, and they had like little pieces of fishing line just kind of wrapped around the trunk of the tree. So the clematis had something to kind of like be trained onto. And at late spring, Nellie Moser is in bloom, and it has a pinkish light lavender bloom that looks almost bluish, glaucous blue in the shade. So it's picking up on the bluey green of the lady's mantle, and it's picking up on the bluey green of the hosta, and it's pure perfection. This particular variety of clematis too is touted as one of the easiest to grow. I know hostas, clematis is hit or miss, right? They can be super picky and they die left and right if you're not good about watering them when they get established. But once you're able to get this guy established, it really is allegedly one of the easier clematis to grow. It gets to be 8 feet tall. Supposedly, I have a feeling in, this more shady situation of underneath a tree that its growth was significantly smaller. It was about maybe 3 feet tall when I saw it and in full bloom. And this is a long bloom clematis too. This will go up to 4 weeks for a bloom time. So just all of that together around, and you'll see it in the show note photo, all around the base of this tree. I thought, man, why does anybody ever plant Pachysandra? Like, when you can have this combo at the foot of your tree, why would you ever do anything else other than this combo? And it was striking. I loved the fact too that definitely a dry shade situation because of that tree. And obviously, you're going to want to water the first year to get things established. But after that, all of these plants will tolerate dry, well-drained soil. And now, because everything sounds better with a British accent, here's Peter to talk about dynamic duos.
As a fledgling gardener, I wondered what I could possibly contribute to this episode. After all, it takes a certain level of skill to successfully combine plants. I'm more at the AS level than the A2 level of gardening. If I were to compare it to the English system of education, I'm afraid you'll have to look that one up. I don't have enough time to explain that arcane UKism today. But what I can discuss is other amazing pairings that we lovingly embrace. Number 1, macaroni and cheese. Whoever's idea it was to take drab pasta and grab the cheese rather than the jar of spaghetti sauce should be knighted. Number 2, Laverne and Shirley. This late 70s television gem holds up. Who doesn't love watching the completely avoidable hijinks of 2 accident-prone women? The duo is pure comedy genius, in my humble opinion. Number 3, John Lennon and Paul McCartney. Has there ever been a more iconic pair of lads from Liverpool? I dare say not. Number 4, a litany of sports superstars. This one was hard to narrow down, so instead I'll present you with the following laundry list. Roger Maris and Mickey Mantle, Magic Johnson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Venus and Serena Williams, and lest I forget, a shout out to my boys Brian and Mark Steen, formerly of Luton Town Football Club. Come on, you Hatters! I'm sorry about that. If these dynamic duos made you smile, imagine how the pairings that Carol and Danielle mentioned will warm your heart. Because let's face it takes a good pair to know a great pair.
Carol, leave it to Peter to always bring it back to English soccer, football. I guess we have to call it football because it's Peter, right?
Yes, that is only proper.
Well, speaking of American football and brown American footballs, we're going to talk to an expert who swears his favorite spring combinations involve the color brown.
Hi, I'm Matt Mattis, and I'm the Northeast reporter for Fine Gardening, and I'm here to talk about my favorite spring combos, and not your average ones. I like more unusual ones.
Matt, welcome. It's so good to have you back on the podcast. We had such a good reaction to our listeners last time with you on the podcast. I had to do it again, especially when I reached out to you and I said spring combos, and you said, yeah, I've got great ones with brown. What?
Brown. Yeah, not just brown, but like every ugly color that you always passed over at the garden center.
Oh my, like just the fact that you put that in an email to me, I was instantly hooked. I'm like, yep, this is our expert. So, all right, fill me in. Brown, really brown?
Yeah, you know when you're walking through a garden center, you see that coleus that's like, it looks like it's just rusted.
Yeah.
And you pass over it and you're like, yeah, I cannot make that work. And, you know, the people next to you are picking out their baby blue and pink and white, and it's all so pretty. I like to challenge myself. I mean, you know, my background is as a graphic designer or creative or an artist, and I like to push myself into that uncomfortable zone. So yeah, brown flowers. There are a lot of brown flowers. I think, you know, we think of Cafe LA, like, let's face it, that's not really brown. That's like a lovely pale pinkish taffy color. Yeah. I'm talking about like chocolate brown, like chestnut colored or like walnut stain colored flowers, and they exist.
Well, and you made a good point too, because like so many of us in spring, a lot of our garden and our backup landscape is brown or in shades of that color. You know, like the woody plants haven't completely started to leaf out yet, you know, so that it's almost that we've got this underlying color that we have to work with anyway. And that underlying color is brown.
It's brown. And you know what? If you think of this as interior design, would you really put pale pink and light blue with your like dark brown leather sofa? You're not going to put a pink pillow on it, right? So, I mean, so the garden in March or April or May, early May, at least here up in the Northeast, is pretty much brown and gray. And you know how this is why we like forsythia, because if you like forsythia, it just, that yellow just stands out on that background of brown. It goes, let's face it, it's like mustard and hamburgers.
So true. So true. All right. So regale me with your first combination, the plants that kind of enter into that brown scheme that you think is just hot to trot.
So you're going to see, and in brown, I'm kind of pushing into terracotta too. So okay, fair. I'm really addicted to mimulus, and you know, mimulus as a genus, you know, the monkey flowers. The mimulus have been divided, I guess. I mean, it depends where you're buying them from. Sometimes it's going to say diplicus, sometimes it's going to say mimulus, but let's just say mimulus for all of them. There are some mimulus, like there's a perennial woody one from the Northwest. It's Dipicus aurantius now, but there's a series called Jelly Bean series, and you can find these like Annie's Annuals, and it's like every mail order nursery seems to carry one of the series. But there is a brownish orange one called Fiesta Marigold, and
the mimulus is called Fiesta Marigold.
Yeah, that's the variety name. That cultivar name is Fiesta Marigold, and it looks like a marigold from like your October garden. So it's like a rusty orange with a brownish or brownish, I don't know what color, brownish purple, dark center. Really striking. And it's not going to work with any other spring flower, but if you grow other mimulus, like you'll see like 6-packs of, usually these are the expensive mimulus, the ones that come with a logo on the
outside of the pot. Yep.
Right. You're like, well, I'm going to pay $7.95 for an annual, but a lot of those logoed annuals that are patented are amazing because they don't set seed and they just keep blooming. So in here is like the diasia, the Otis, there's Nemesia. You'll see these at the garden. You might say, I don't know what those are. They sort of look like a pansy, but they're on sale with the pansies.
Okay, all right.
But there's always like a brownish or orangey colored tone in all of those. And it's interesting. If you start them from seed, you get a mixed palette. It's like a clown pants palette of yellow and red and it's just like colors that don't go together. So I started from seed and I have to isolate them all.
Okay, all right.
Yellows in one pot. I put all the browns in one pot. I put the terracottas in another pot.
Okay.
And I do that all spring. I go and I shop for Arctotis, which is like a daisy from South Africa. You'll see those in bloom in the spring, and you're like, why am I going to pick that brownish orange flower?
And now are you combining? So if you started with that mimulus, which is really like, hot to try, it was Fiesta Marigold, right? You said is the cultivar name.
Yeah.
What would you pair with that? I mean, are you throwing in a coral colored diacia in there, or are you not? Okay.
I mean, yeah, diacia does come with coral, but I might throw in an orangey one, a more orange one. But there's other things that are out there. You just have to look hard, or you have to start them from seed. Like there's a Linaria. Are you familiar with Linaria? Like
fairy lights. Yeah.
So there's a species called Linaria tristis.
Okay.
And I found this at a nursery in Vermont, and it's brown. It's like brown, dark brown, leather brown, amazing bluish foliage with brown flowers, and it's short. And I'll fill troughs with that, with Fiesta Marigold. Or I'll mix in, other brownish spring flowers. Trying to think of a really good one.
Okay.
Sometimes the foliage. I mean, look how many brown foliage there is, like the euphorbia, like blackbird or Miner's Merlot, or any of these new hybrids. You'll see them also in the spring. They have like dark burgundy foliage or dark brown foliage, or even the variegated ones like Ascot Rainbow. All those mix in so well with.
Oh, definitely. So now I can picture like the mimulus, the Fiesta Marigold, and then get that Linaria. You said it was Linaria triceratops in the mix. So that's like 2 annuals. And in with that, you could either plant around if you've got, one of those dark colored euphorbias as a staple in the garden, or I assume this would all look excellent in a container too.
Totally in the container, because your background color is all that foliage, and it might be heuchera, any of the heuchera with the dark foliage, right? From dark violet, dark purple to near black to brown to copper to mustard. All those weird colors really go well together.
Yes. Okay. Well, and you must have had a little bird or a little spy on our earlier segment when Carol and I were talking, because in our spring combos, each one of us had some form of heuchera, like an odd colored heuchera in our mix. So that is, and I think heuchera is underrated as a spring plant to add into spring combos, because
it lasts all season. I mean, from spring to fall. I mean, I personally try not to use it unless it's an extraordinarily weird color, because everyone's using it, right? So I'm like, that's just me. I still, I have that Pinterest board that has sort of the rainbow colors of heuchera in it for a window box. Like, I still want to do that.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I know exactly what pin that is too, because I think it's on my Pinterest board too. All right, Matt. So what else for a captivating spring combination that really gets your blood kind of boiling?
Well, I'm a plant geek, so I like something that, let's say, my neighbors don't have, and still really pretty. So it stops them in their tracks. So lately, I've been doing a lot of the Californian wildflowers, like the wildflowers you'd see in a super bloom in the Sierras.
Oh.
And these are like, I start them from seed, but sometimes I just order them from West Coast nurseries. Like, again, Annie's Annuals, so somewhere always sells these, like Phacelia campanularia. I know that's a mouthful. Phacelia, the desert bluebells. Have you seen that in bloom?
No, I don't think so. No.
It is so blue it hurts your eyes. It is truly deep cobalt blue.
Oh,
And
so like Meconopsis, but hopefully easier to
no,
grow than Meconopsis?
no, darker than Meconopsis. Meconopsis
Oh,
is like morning glory blue, I think, right? These are
oh,
like, well, these are like violet, dark purple blue, like the color of a
like
blue glass
gentians?
bottle. Yeah, gentian
Okay.
color.
Okay. All right.
And there's
Ooh.
it's just the color, and the foliage is kind of brushed with a frosty burgundy tone to it. So
Okay.
these all grow together like Nemophila. You might know penny black,
Yep. Yep.
right? So
Yes.
Nemophila is Menziesii is a wildflower that grows up in the Sierras. There's like a baby blue one, but I like penny black the best. Or there's another one called Maculata, which is baby 5-spot. I don't grow that.
Okay.
That's
I
white with
don't know
purple
that one, but
spots.
I know that the Nemophilias always look like almost like little doll's eyes. You know,
They do.
they've got that dark center to that cup of blue, or maybe like a dark purpley black color. But
Yeah, the
yeah,
penny
they look
black
like
is
apples.
probably the closest to black of any flower. I suppose if you wanted to be morbid, you could grow it with the brown ones. But I grow it with I grow it either alone in a container, then I group all the
Okay.
containers together.
Oh, okay,
I
okay.
did troughs last year. You know, troughs are like a thing now. Like, and I've
Yeah.
been sort of like recreating a meadow in the Sierras, like with lemnanthes. Douglasii was that like the fried eggplant, or tidy tips, which is Leia platyglossa.
Oh, I don't know
These
this
and
plant.
yeah, you could Google these tidy tips. You could buy plants from the West Coast nurseries, mail order. They all these bloom like through May and June and probably peter out around the 4th of July. But you're
Okay.
basically recreating a wild meadow from the Western mountains, from the Rockies or the Sierras, or in your own backyard.
I love that. It's like these small little naturalistic gardens that you're creating. I love that idea because, hey, if nature does it, she's got to be right about the combination.
She knows.
If she knows, like, yeah, you can't go wrong if you're emulating what already occurs in nature for a combination.
Yeah, and you may not think these, like a lot of them are yellow. If you look at the thumbnail in a catalog, you're like, I'm not going to order yellow. I don't like yellow. But if you see yellow in the spring, again, in a pretty much a brown environment, yellow with the sky blue, with the dark blue, this is nature's creation.
Yes, it goes back to almost what you were saying about the forsythia at the top of the show. Yeah, it was absolutely that yellow really does go with brown and blue. It does.
Yeah.
So for listeners who are listening to this and going, okay, Matt's saying all these plant names that we don't know, we're going to put a plant list in the show notes. And Matt has been gracious enough to say that he'll supply us with some photos of some of these oddballs as well. Because heaven knows, I don't know all of these. I'm gonna need to see pictures. So Matt, what else? What else is going on in your spring combinations? Like maybe leave us with a combination that you just can't live without.
I could go back to here's, and maybe people won't agree with this, but I love pansies. And if I go to the garden center, I feel bad for those pansies that are like yellow with the dark brown centers. Because everyone's avoiding them. They're getting there's so many beautiful ones to choose from now. But honestly, the yellow with the dark brown centers, someone says to me, those are the Boston College colors. They look like something, that a cheerleader is going to wear. But in a brown garden, they look spectacular. They don't look great in the garden in June or July, but April, May, and early June, those colors stand out of the brown landscape so well. So I just buy all those colored fancies that I think I won't like, and then when I put them together, they really work.
It almost sounds like you go in with like the land of misfit toys attitude towards shopping in the garden center in spring. But I like that approach, instead of, hey, I'm going to invest in these 3 plants that will only look good in spring. You say, all right, let me go rely on maybe some annuals or tender perennials that are going to work with my foundation landscape that is in hues of brown, or, perhaps like darker burgundy and in the gray tones. I love that. I love that. That's a great tip. And it's a way to enhance the garden without investing hundreds and hundreds of dollars into, a plant of, no offense to perennials, but a perennial that has like one shot in 1 week in May, and then it doesn't look like anything the rest of the time.
And these you have to look carefully at flowers too. There are some violas or pansies that have, is it frizzle sizzle? I forget the name of the series. They're really frilly pansies, and they often, there's one color in there that's sort of a lavender purple that blends to sort of a mustard yellow. You might think it's yellow, but if you look carefully, it's like a chartreuse center.
Oh, okay. All right.
And if you combine that with, chartreuse leaved plants like heuchera or even the euphorbia and even coleus, some of this, there's like a weird mustardy colored coleus. It's exactly the same color as the center of that pansy, and it was one of my best combinations last year, and everyone commented it. And I think if you saw those plants individually, you would think no
way that they would go together, but they do. Matt, do you have a picture of that combo from last year?
I do. I'll send that.
Yes, that's amazing. That's amazing. All right, so leave us with, and this is completely off topic, and Matt doesn't know this question is coming, but leave us with one spring plant you can't live without.
Primroses, Villa polyanthus. I mean, those are, again, a clown color plant, but if you find someone who grows them well, the best ones come from France, from seed. But if you can get, look, there's more and more hybrids out there now. Mm-hmm. So I like anything that comes back every year. Let's face it.
Okay. All right. That's a good answer. All right. So for those who that think Matt is off of his rocker and that these colors, no way could they go together. Again, go to the show notes. I'm excited. Go to the show notes, see some of these pictures, and then also the plant list of, and show your neighbors. Like, you can get outside of that pastel pink and blue box. You can really amp up your spring show. Matt, thank you so much for being with us. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for asking.
I mean, I was skeptical going into hearing Matt's expert testimony about brown combinations in spring, but yeah, he's really right. He nailed it. Those new chocolate and bronzy and, kind of purpley colors actually do work in spring. You had one, Carol.
I did. I have to admit that Palace Purple is actually brown.
But it is a stunning brown. A stunning.
Stunning.